Alright, we are starting a new unit, and that unit brings us slightly away from where we have been and into China. So, we're looking at the beginning of China, and certainly early China does not look like this image. However, soon we will get to when the Chinese start building such structures and having great artwork such as this. However, people start inhabiting China, scientists think about 500,000 years ago. And especially they found remains in caves. Caves are certainly good housing for early humans. And we call these people that were known to be living in the caves the Peking Man. And these are nomads. They're hunting and gathering. They're fishing. They certainly made some tools. They had fire. But think back to those early humans that we were studying a few months ago. Pretty primitive when it comes to any sort of developed culture. However, the Chinese, and this is what the Peking Man looks like, the Chinese start to settle and start to farm. They have crops. So then the culture starts to develop. So since China is a massive piece of land, there's a number of different areas that we have people settling. And compared to Mesopotamia or Egypt, this is a whole different scale of large. So the first place we have people is up here, which is the Tibetan Plateau. And the second area is over here, which is currently known as Mongolia. And on your sheet, it's the third one from the bottom. It's called the Northeastern Plain. So we have people that are settling out here in the western part of China. And for the most part, these people are nomads. And they're nomads because they're herding this animal right here, which is a yak. Now, the Northeastern Plain and the Tibetan Plateau are not particularly good for farming. So instead of farming, people travel around, especially with the yak. The yak's useful for, you can get clothing from the yak hair. You can get milk from the yak, make butter out of it, make yogurt. So the yak as an animal is extremely useful. So people out in the Northeastern Plain and the Tibetan Plateau keep these yak around. And they need to move from place to place. So they spread out over a large territory because you have to bring the yak to different grazing lands and make sure, depending on the season, they have grass to eat. And since the people out here are traveling a lot, as nomads tend to be, they do not establish really permanent settlements, but they have mostly tents that they can move around pretty easily. And people in outer China are very different from those of inner China. Inner China settles namely in two major areas. Up here, which is by what's called the Yellow River. And secondly, down here by the Yangtze River. And these are two of the longest rivers in the world. And around it, there's a great deal of good farmland. So, inner China versus these nomadic people, we have a lot of large populations that they're growing wheat and rice and lots of livestock. And certainly it allows them to grow larger as a population, and it allows them to settle. So you start having permanent settlements. Instead of people packing up their tents every few months, you have these structures and towns and villages and cities that start growing. And it's in this region. So the Xia Dynasty is the first dynasty that arises in China. And as we will find out in the next month or so, there's a great deal of dynasties that arise in China. China's history, modern history, spans about 11,000 years, which is a fairly long amount of time, and has many dynasties. We're not going to look at all of them. However, we will look at some of the most important ones. So the Xia Dynasty arises around the Yellow River, also known as the Huanghe River. And the Yellow River is incredibly powerful, and it provides a great deal of good farmland. So as the people start developing and settling, they start to establish a culture. They start to have a society with great artwork and pottery and structures such as these. The one on the left, nice piece of pottery. On the right, ceremonial altar. So you have culture starting to develop. However, there isn't really one unifying government. And where that unifying government comes from, well, it comes from the river. How does it come from the river? Well, good question. Since the river floods every year, and we've talked about this in the last couple of units, we have the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flooding, we have the Nile River flooding. Flooding provides the silt, but it also can result in a great deal of destruction. And when it comes to the Huanghe, the Yellow River, there's a massive amount of destruction that comes along with it. And the reason is the river fluctuates incredibly from dry season to wet season. At the lowest point, it can be about 25 feet deep, whereas the highest point, it could be get up to 200 feet deep. So every year, there would be massive destruction from the flooding of the river. So the question becomes, how can you control it? And the idea of how the Xia Dynasty began is that you have people that start trying to control the river, to try to stop flooding, to prevent destruction of land and homes. So this idea of if you can control the river, you can control the people, is how things begin. So the Xia Dynasty takes power, takes control, is allowed to become the rulers because they are able to control the river. And as we go throughout this unit, we'll look at a number of other dynasties and look at where they are able to get control and influence in how they influence China.